Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Elizabeth with LA's Handcrafted Jewelry, and I recently asked you all in the community and Facebook pages what type of pieces or techniques that you'd like to learn at the start of this year. And there were a lot of contenders, so I tried to create a piece that incorporated as many of them as I could. So here's this piece. It features a small stone that is faceted on the back. It also has a hammered frame with woven components that are layered one on top of the other. Now in this case, I used it to create a choker, but you could even do a couple to create a fun pair of earrings. You can also use larger stones, but be sure to use thicker wire and increase the amount of wire that you use. But before you despair that you don't have the same stone as this one, this design can be used for both flatback cabochons as well as more faceted stones. But before we get started, I'd like to thank CASDANS for becoming a sponsor and supporting this channel. CASDANS is where I currently get most of my stones. They're super high quality and wallet friendly. They have cabs, faceted stones, and beads, as well as a live gemstone auction. You can even purchase mixed cab boxes if you're like me and you can't make up your mind. They are adding new products to their website all the time, so I highly recommend checking them out. You can also join their Facebook page to see some of the new upcoming stones. I've left all the links to their website and Facebook page in the description below. Now let's get started on our micro pendant. For materials and tools, you're going to need a ruler, 20 gauge wire, 22 gauge wire, 30 gauge wire for weaving. You're also going to need a stone. Mine happens to be a 12 by 10 millimeter tie ruby from CASDANS. You're also going to need chain nose pliers, round nose pliers, and flush cutters. I also have a chasing hammer and a bench block for hammering my wire. And you're also probably going to need a mandrel of some kind, or at least something with the same diameter as a pencil. Now to get started, I'm going to go ahead and take my faceted stone here and lay it on its face on a post-it note. And then I've got a mechanical pencil and I'm just going to trace around the outside of the stone. And I'm going to use this as a guide to create my frame. Now I'm going to take my 20 gauge wire and my bench block, and I'm going to grab my chasing hammer here, and I'm going to hammer the end of this wire. I'm going to be holding the balled end of the hammer and just letting the weight of the hammer drop onto the top of the wire. And this is going to flatten it out for me. You don't need excessive force to do this. And as you can see, I'm working from the spool. I haven't cut the wire yet. But now that I have my paddled end, I'm going to go ahead and grab my file here. You don't have to do this, but I just like to have my ends filed. And I'm going to file the end with my little file here and just kind of make it smooth. Once I've done that with my wire, I'm going to take my round nose pliers and create a little bit of a loop at the end of the wire. Sorry, this is off camera. Just like so. And then I'm going to stick my round nose pliers about halfway into the teeth of, well, about a third of the way into the teeth of the pliers and round it over the top. Like so. This is kind of what it should look like here on the end. Now I'm going to grab my mandrel and I'm going to wrap this around just a little bit to begin the oval shape. Now once I've done that, I'm going to check it against my outline of the stone here. And I'm going to begin creating the other side of it with my mandrel. And as you can see here, I'm just adjusting the frame. Now from here, I'm just using my eye to kind of figure out where I want to start the other loop. But it's about 1/8 of an inch from the other side, and that's where I'm going to begin my next bend. And I've marked it with a Sharpie for more clarification here, but I'm just bending this over the top of my round nose pliers, like so. Now marking off on my ruler here, it's about 5/8 of an inch is where I'm going to cut the wire. So I'm going to grab my flesh cutters and cut at that mark there. From there, I'm going to pull this end up a little bit and then place it on my bench block and hammer the other side just like I did the previous side. And I'm going to go ahead and file the end of this just to make it nice and smooth like I did the previous side. Now from there, I'm going to take my round nose pliers and create another loop on this side to match the other side. And if it's not exactly right, you can trim off a little bit and continue to create a loop until the either side match. Now I'm just going to go ahead and compare it to the stone. Just remember that when you hammer the wire, it will expand a little bit, so if it's a little tight, that's okay. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and take my chasing hammer and begin flattening the wire. And I'm trying to flatten the tops of the loops and the bottom of the frame. I'm not aiming for the little loops on either side of the frame. Now I'm just comparing the stone to the frame again, and it's looking pretty good. From there, I'm going to grab my 30 gauge wire, and I'm going to pull out about 3 feet of wire and then fold it in half. And then I'm going to grab my 22 gauge wire here. Both of these are about 5.5 inches long. So I've taken my folded wire here and I'm going to wrap it around one of the 22 gauge sections. I've marked it at the center and this is where I'm going to start. And I'm going to begin by wrapping the weaving wire around this 22 gauge base wire 3 times. Now I'm going to grab my second piece of 22 gauge wire and bring it up underneath the first one and wrap one time around both wires. From there, I'm going to grab my frame piece and I'm going to bring it in just underneath. And I'm going to wrap my weaving wire around the frame piece as well as the middle base wire. And now I'm going to wrap it around just the top 2 base wires like so. And then bring it down in between the 2 wires here. And wrap it around the top base wire 3 times total. And here's where it should look like at the start. Now I'm going to grab my weaving wire and I'm going to bring around those 2 top base wires 1 time. And then down and around both base wires and the frame again. And then bring it in between those and around the top 2 base wires. And then in between those 2 base wires and around the top base wire 3 times. And we're basically going to repeat this pattern all the way up the side of the frame. But to get that nice rounded angle, I'm going to go ahead and just carefully bend the base wires up and around inside the frame, so that way it's a little bit easier to navigate the pattern. Now once I've made it to about this point, you can see I wrapped around the 2 base wires one time, and I need to wrap around the frame, but since I've made it to the loop, I'm going to go ahead and feed this weaving wire through the loop and then over top, and then in between the frame and those 2 base wires to wrap around the 2 base wires one time, basically completing that pattern but also securing that loop, and then wrapping 3 times around that inner wire. And now that I've closed off that loop, I'm going to go ahead and have to feed it through that loop again with my 30 gauge wire. And then wrap around those top 2 base wires one time, once I get it through the loop. And then I'm going to finish off this weave by wrapping it 3 times around that inner base wire. Now we're basically going to do the same thing on the other side. Now that we finished our weaves, I'm going to go ahead and do the pull and twist method to disconnect the rest of my excess wire here. You can also use your flesh cutters. And then from there, I'm going to take the inner base wire and fold it down the back. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. I'm going to grab my flesh cutters and I'm going to trim this end here, leaving just a little tiny tail end on either side. And I'm going to use my chain nose pliers or flat nose pliers if you have those, and compress those into the back of the frame. I'm going to grab my ruby and put it in there and just press it up against the frame with my fingers and hold that in place while I grab those other two base wires and basically bring them around the back side of the stone. As you can see, I'm not crisscrossing the wires, I'm just bringing them alongside each other, very much parallel. From there, I'm going to bring the wires up to the top and bend them over the top like so. And I'm going to grab my flesh cutters and trim off a little bit, just a little bit. This is going to help me so I can wrap it around that top loop there using my chain nose pliers. Then doing the same thing on the opposite side. Now I'm just going to scooch this wire down a little bit and then trim off the excess with my flesh cutters. And then I'll compress those wires against that loop with my chain nose pliers. Now once I finish creating the back, I'm going to go ahead and thread a piece of 30 gauge wire in through the frame. From there I'm going to grab my stone and stick it back into the frame. And I'm going to basically use this weaving wire to secure the back to the front so that way the stone doesn't pop out. So I'm basically going to do this by bringing the weaving wire through to the back of the frame pieces on both sides. And as you can see, I'm kind of struggling to get the weaving wire through there. Always bring your tools in if you need them. Just use them very gently, especially with 30 gauge wire since it's very fragile. And I'm just wrapping the wire around the back base wire. I guess the top base wire, depends on what perspective you're looking at it, but I'm wrapping it around the very back. And I'm going to do that 3 times to really secure that wire. And if you're using a larger stone, you might also need to secure it in multiple locations rather than just one, but because this one is smaller, I'll only need to secure it in the one area. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the other side of the weaving wire. Now I'm just going to go ahead and pull and twist off these excess wires. And here's the final piece. I hope that you all enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you'd like to stay up to date on the latest tutorials and videos. If you'd like to see some of the written tutorials that I have available, you can find them on my website. The link is in the description below. And until next time, happy weaving!